The Boys is an Amazon original series that takes an interesting look at the overindulgence of superhero culture and tries to examine real-world issues through that lens. Like any story, it's only as good as its characters, which admittedly take a little while to grow on you. From the moment you see the Seven, you see them as knockoff heroes, parodies of the more official Marvel and DC Caped Crusaders. Homelander, the leader of the Seven, is, on the surface, Superman's power set juxtaposed by Captain America's aesthetic. This is all a facade, of course, as what the show is really trying to do is show multiple perspectives on the same event. We, the viewer, the law-abiding citizen, and the bystander, we see what we're told to see without ever seeing the full story. Early on, we see the de facto leaders of the Seven, Homelander and Queen Maeve. They enter a building to stop a gunman. They kill him gruesomely, then fire shots harmlessly at Maeve to build the narrative that was all self-defense and justified. All that matters to this brand of heroes is public reception and marketability. From the first moment we see the heroes, they're talking about their points and how their popularity fluctuates. This leads to an interesting concept and actually provides some valuable insight at the current culture of perception being everything, notably in social media like Instagram. Aside from being clear commentary against greedy studios like Disney and Marvel, this theme extends to a particularly memorable airplane sequence. Maeve and Homelander board a plane hoping to convince the public that their rescue abilities surpass the US government, but in stopping the terrorists, they damage the plane and send it into a spiral. The only way to save people now is one at a time flying them to the ground. There might not be time to save everyone, so Homelander just decides not to save anyone. If he could only save a few, the narrative would be around their rash decision to let 123 people die. Instead, they abandon the plane, let all 123 aboard die, and spawn it into a story about not being allowed to be present because they weren't in the military's chain of command. It's a fascinating outlook towards the idea of doing terrible things for the sake of the best public image. Why risk losing popularity because you couldn't save everybody, when you can let everyone die, then claim if you were there the tragedy wouldn't have happened? During this sequence, we see the first sign of life in Maeve's character. She rejects Homelander's grim view and wants to save all that they can. She, however, cannot fly herself and has no choice but to escape with him, horrified in the decision. I would have liked to see this trait blossom because, as it stands, she's Starlight's 20 years into the business. All optimism has worn thin. She's no longer a hero, just a pawn in a marketing campaign, constantly working to sell movies and merchandise. She ultimately talks to Starlight and gives her a push to be the hero and to not give in to the corporate side, but for her arc, it's underwhelming. We saw a real horror in her when she was an accomplice in 123 unnecessary deaths, but we never saw any more insight from a single moody scene and the start of a love triangle with her old friend. Queen Maeve has the seeds to become a truly interesting character, but was relegated to the background in both plots of the story. She was number 2 of the 7 and only a minor character regarding Hughie's quest for vengeance. Now let's rewind and talk about Hughie, the focus of the show. In the pilot, Hughie is on a date with his girlfriend Robin when one of the 7, the quickster called A-Train, smashes into her, and really smashes. Like a train. It's a gore fest like much of the show. It so badly wants to be edgy and show the aspects of superheroes you don't really see. It always annoyed me that there wasn't any blood in The Dark Knight, but I think I prefer that to the tackiness of some of the shots in the show, most notably A-Train's murder and a shot where Homelander used laser vision to slice off a guy's legs, but there was no blood and the wound clearly wasn't cauterized. Too many times the gore looked bad and was too gratuitous to be entertaining, but I will admit there were times when it was really eye-opening. Lasers in the real world would be horrifying. A lot of superpowers would have really troubling ramifications, and I can appreciate that they really tried to show what that would look like. The gore was largely unsuccessful at creating a real feeling of disgust, aside from one scene where the Aquaman knockoff had his gills fingered. No, I didn't like that. That was bad. Please stop. Speaking of gross things, the show also has a very noticeable grade. I get it. They want to be different. They don't want the vibrant, lighthearted Marvel tone to seep through. They want to be different, but they really took inspiration from 90s crime dramas, and it's just not for me. It looks really ugly. After Hughie loses his girlfriend, A-Train can't even be bothered to stop, for reasons we'll find out later. When the incident becomes public, he lies and claims she ran into the road, contradicting what really happened. This understandably makes Hughie see red. Anytime he sees A-Train's face, his heartbeat skyrockets. He can't help but see Robin's face and lash out. He punches walls, he wants revenge, he wants to do something unspeakable. All A-Train really had to do was apologize, admit he made a mistake, but instead, Hughie was offered hush money. It wasn't until Hughie met the supposed FBI agent Billy Butcher that he finally had the recourse for revenge. He saw what A-Train really thought, who was joking in the nightclub with other supers about the incident. Hughie was madder than ever. We could hear his heartbeat. We relived those final seconds with him over and over and over. We were completely on his side. Ultimately, he took the hush money and used the excuse to get inside Voight headquarters and plant a bug, under one condition. A-Train had to apologize. This show, in situations like this specifically, has a real problem with relying on convenient situations when they really don't have to at all. Butcher convinces Hughie to take the deal and ask for an apology. Right away, the negotiator says there's no way in hell that'll happen, and the implication is clear that he won't even bring it up. After the phone call, Hughie laments that they won't just apologize, and Butcher promises they will, and then they just do. When he goes to visit, A-Train has a scripted apology for no reason other than Butcher kinda thought they might come around. After the meeting, Hughie does his first bad boy thing and plants a bug, proving to be a huge mistake. Part of the Seven is a man that can turn invisible, and we see early on that he likes to hang out in bathrooms and get the scoop, or just to be a pervert. This is actually a pretty decent setup. That seems like a throwaway at the time. Needless to say, Translucent, catches Hughie in the act, and follows him and Butcher home to teach them a lesson. The fight goes about as well as you could expect fighting an invisible man would. Aimless punches miss and return shots come from nothing. If it wasn't for an establishing shot building Translucent as a perv, alongside a Fallen cameo where he talked about the need to be naked to really be invisible, we might not have realized what had happened when a bloody punch scattered blood all over Translucent's face. We saw a small dot of blood dance for a moment before Butcher got an idea. After nearly swallowing his teeth, Butcher spits blood at Translucent, painting his form, which makes for a creative solution to a well-set-up problem, and interesting, if sometimes cheesy visual effects. After capturing Invisiguy, we start to learn about his powers and how they work. He's more like a cuttlefish than the Harry Potter's Cloak of Invisibility. His skin hardens and reshapes, making it difficult to kill him. After trapping him, Butcher and his team try shooting at him, but the bullets ricochet harmlessly. They discover the only way to kill him is from the inside. Rather than doing the obvious thing and making him eat something, whether it's a bomb or poison, they told him the plan, knocked him out, then lodged the bomb in his rectum. A friendly reminder that this is an edgy show for grown-ups. During this time, news of Translucent's disappearance starts to gain traction, and the supers start to close in. Butcher's team tried to distract Homelander, leaving Hughie alone with the super, hell-bent on escape. Translucent breaks free from his enclosure and threatens to escape, leaving no choice but for Hughie to pull the trigger. Throughout this entire scene, we see Hughie's heart racing, and the flashbacks race by, fresh in his mind. Pure anger and an unbridled desire for revenge. We see Hughie slowly slipping towards becoming a monster. This is when the stakes really elevate. This is a world where heroes are national treasures, beloved like actors or royalty, and Hughie just murdered one of the 7 most popular. While all this is going on, the other star of the story is starting to find her way. A young, optimistic girl, Starlight, thinks joining the Seven will be the opportunity of a lifetime, but the illusion is quickly broken from her very first interaction. When outside the public's eye, heroes are unscripted and often vulgar or crass. The idea of heroes swooping in to save the day is challenged when she sees most of these situations are written by a marketing team and only exist for press. In fact, when she tries to save a woman from being date raped, onlooker cameras that only caught half the story painted her as a bully, beating up random people. She was chastised for saving somebody, simply because there was nobody there to publicize it and really control the narrative. Getting into the Seven wasn't easy either, as her first encounter in the Void building was with the butt of heroes, the Deep. He promised he could get her in, all she had to do was fuck him. She got mad because she's a person, but since she has powers, she wrecked the room and now Aquaman had proof she attacked him. In this world, it's all about the spin. This left Annie without a choice. She could leave and give up her shot to follow her dream and possibly be arrested, or she could degrade herself to save face and land a spot on the Seven. From here, the Deep story takes a very strange path. He's constantly the butt of jokes, unsatisfied with his role, and wishing he could do more. In a move to try and save a dolphin, he ends up surrounded by police and murdering the dolphin. Eventually, the story about him and Annie leaks, and he's asked to take a sabbatical from the Seven, and the longer he's away, the clearer it is that he won't be returning. He was essentially excommunicated. Well away, he was gluttonous and made one last-ditch effort to save a lobster from being eaten, only for the store clerk to kill the lobster before selling it to him. Everything he tries fails, ultimately culminating in a reversal of his first scene with Starlight. A woman pressures him into sexual acts he's not comfortable with, and the implication if he tries to resist, that she'll abuse his bad publicity and lie about what happens hangs in the air. I'm not really sure what they're trying to do with this arc. I kinda think they're trying to do the morally gray approach to storytelling, where a character isn't wholly good or evil. I think it's far more likely that they're trying to do what Tarantino did in Glorious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In both those films, awful people were given a fictionalized version of history and killed brutally. The arc dragged them through hell as a wish fulfillment sort of justice. This seems to be what they're trying to do for this arc. The idea of giving him a taste of his own medicine, but it ultimately falls flat. I think the reason this really doesn't work is because his arc deviates from the inciting incident. His downward spiral started from misbehavior with Starlight, but after being exiled to Ohio, their paths never cross again, making this sense of underwhelming finality almost inevitable. If you want a redemption arc, he needs to redeem himself in Starlight's eyes. If you want a punishment arc, Starlight needs to be an active player. While it's true that she mentioned a dick in her face, her intent was never to out him, it was simply collateral damage. Another character that could have been cut altogether is Tactical Mask Guy, whose name I don't even care enough to know. He never said a single line of dialogue and didn't really do anything. On top of that, he's not even the only silent character. Hughie and Butcher's team end up liberating a super bred to be a villain. Neither of these characters say a line of dialogue, which is just frustrating. It's not used in an interesting way, and it's only there to advance the plot, by getting the world's sexiest man alive, Haley Joel Osment, into the thick of things. The idea with her at last was that she started to see herself as a monster, and it wasn't until she found a comb and sharpened up that she saw herself again and almost spoke. This entire scene just came across half-baked. Cuts were a little jarring, a lot like that one. There'd be times when a character would say something like, "Boy, I wonder what Hughie's up to." Then we cut to Starlight walking in the street. We're so trained by the language of films to hear this as a setup for a transition. We hear that and set the scene before the cut's even made, so when the cut doesn't quite match, it's really noticeable. Back to the silent chick. This show really does a neat trick. What separates Hughie from Butcher is that Hughie still values human life. Butcher would rather kill a super than save a friend, and it's why they finally split paths at the end. Hughie went back to save all his partners, including the super. We watch as Hughie and the gang rescue Kimiko, and the entire scene we're waiting for her to wake up and save everyone, but she doesn't. She's unconscious. Instead, Starlight gets to finally prove herself as a hero. In any other show, this would be a pretty big Deus Ex Machina, but it's not. We already have the solution with us in the form of Kimiko, so it really doesn't ruin the moment when Starlight shows up and gets to be the hero. It's a heroic moment that preemptively addresses the nitpickers by already including a superhero in the room. I like when stories do stuff like that. In fact, I really like that they decided to go this way. The more we learn about this story, the more we realize that superheroes are made. We see them as special beings destined to save the innocent, but keeping Kimiko unconscious reverses the roles, and it's up to the normal people to take a stand and save the hero. It's an exciting role reversal. The two main plots I spoke about, Starlight's experience joining the Seven and Hughie's misguided quest for vengeance, ultimately intersect with their relationship. This sets the stage for a really interesting conflict with Butcher's crusade to kill all supers, but the relationship suffers from pacing issues and chemistry that sometimes feels a little bit off. In one scene we see Hughie sincerely struggle to talk to her, and the next they're sleeping together and madly in love. Worse yet, it seems that they only take this massive leap so Starlight's in the most vulnerable place when she eventually finds out what Hughie's up to. The Seven, being the masters of controlling the narrative that they are, paint Hughie's crew as bloodthirsty tyrants hungry for vengeance. In reality, the attempted murders slip away fairly quickly, and the team becomes an investigative crew, researching the mysterious Compound V. When I talked about A-Train earlier, I put a little pin away, saying we'd find out later where he was going. He was on Compound V. It makes people crazy. It's a drug meant for superheroes. Every power gets amplified. They lose their self-control. We don't really see how bad it gets until A-Train's girlfriend kills her landlord accidentally. This is when chasing down Compound V becomes an absolute priority. It kills Robin and now another innocent man, but the further they investigate, it becomes clear that the Compound V isn't just a drug, it's the very cause of superheroes in the first place. Voight has been injecting babies with Compound V, creating their own superheroes for half a century. When learning this, we get a badass scene, just watch. While Compound V is a fun concept to explore that opens dozens of doors, it does raise some questions regarding the world building. If Compound V and Voight only started 50 years ago, what was the explanation for the sudden appearance of supers? We see Jesus was just seen as a superhero, but then why would he be special? I would have liked to see more world building, especially when superheroes seem so ingrained into this world. It's strange to think that they suddenly appeared 50 years ago and everybody is fully on board, accepting of their sudden appearance and nothing in society really changes. I really would have liked to see them examine the world, look at religion as something other than gay people are bad. They're talking... like it's not allowed. It's allowed now. It's an important message, sure, but when the rest of the show found such clever ways to inlay real-world problems in the context of this fictional world, it's a shame to see religion broken down to such a simple commentary that's meant solely to critique the real world and barely serves a purpose to the story. When the heroes discover that Compound V is the source of their power, it sort of creates an identity crisis, notably for Annie. She confronts her mom in a gripping scene trying to get to the bottom of it, and she realizes she's just a pawn. She starts to doubt everything. This comes alongside finding out her boyfriend is a killer, and during the lingering question of whether or not the Seven are even heroes, or just a successful IP. She gets her
everything special about you came out of a bottle
moment, which was almost really charming. Hughie stands up saying that it wasn't her powers that saved him, it was her. Being there for him and going bowling with him. He was in a dark place and needed light to pull him out of it. I say almost charming because her response was basically, LOL, fuck off, murder. Nevertheless, Starlight does decide that it's her job to be a hero, and shows up to stop A-Train from killing another while tweaking out on Compound V. It's the same anger we've seen, the same heartbeat, and then A-Train collapses. This entire time they've been foreshadowing the danger of seeking revenge, and it's not Hughie that breaks first, it's A-Train. He holds Hughie responsible for his girlfriend's death. I was silent when I saw that scene. This show starts with Hughie in the lowest point of his life, pissed off at A-Train. He wants to kill him, an apology, something! But by the end, he stays behind to save A-Train's life. He doesn't have powers, but he's more heroic than A-Train ever was. Speaking of A-Train, he was terrified about losing his title as the fastest man alive. He tells himself the reason he needs to take Compound V is to keep that title, and at one point, he even races with another possible fastest man. We see his motivations in the touching scenes with his scared brother. We see that he's lying to himself. If you pay attention, you can see where A-Train is headed the entire time. His arc tells a very real story of addiction, how people blame others, hurt other people, and ultimately themselves. The race A-Train held, by the way, would not be interesting. It lasted maybe a second, and they had a packed stadium. I seriously doubt any spectator could really see either of them during the race. I get why they did this because it's a fairly compelling plot point, but it sort of takes you out of the immersion. That wouldn't be a fun event in person. It reminds me a lot of Penn's discussion of Nolan's film The Prestige. The main trick that drives them to madness is a teleportation act, where Christian Bale steps in one door and out the other. The trick wouldn't work on a live stage, he said. When a trick's that amazing, there's only one way to do it. Well, then that's how they did it. That was a theme in the film too, that P.T. Barnum was certain the trick was real when everyone warned against it. Without that certainty, the movie really would have lost a lot of weight, and I think it's a similar thing here. It's an interesting story beat, but in the context of the real world, it wouldn't work, so it pulls you out just a little bit. On the topic of breaking immersion, the show does fall victim to the holdout situation, where a lot could be solved or at the very least expedited if two characters just sat down to talk. Annie and Hughie do agree to talk, but Hughie answers her questions about as stupidly as Jon Snow when asked if he killed Mance Rayder. It felt like he was trying to answer in the worst way imaginable and piss her off. I really wish we could have actually seen a full in-depth conversation, rather than just, hey, did you kill him? Yes. One overriding plot point is the idea that the Seven should be allowed in the military, but we never really see a clear motive. It never seems like they want command either. They just want a situation similar to the Sokovia Accords, where the government will send them to handle threats. By the end, we see them get what they want, but only because they're the only things that can stop the supervillains that Voight created. This military protection ultimately keeps them out of jail, but they wouldn't have been jail-bound if they weren't arming terrorists with superpowers in the first place. It seems like this military plan is to protect themselves from themselves, and I really would have liked to see more of what Voight was trying to do. I'm a little wary we actually will, considering the woman spearheading the charge was killed, but if it gets a second season, I definitely want to see what the plan was. Madeline Stillwell, the founder of Voight, was always shrouded in secrecy. Her plans were kept secret, everything about the heroes. From their conception to their day-to-day work was kept secret from the public. Everything we see from her was a lie. She tells Homelander that he had a baby, but it clawed its way out of Butcher's wife, killing her, then drowning in blood. Then at the end, when Homelander finally kills her, he says, "Thank you. Thank you for finally telling me the truth." Everything she said to Homelander up until that point was a lie. Butcher was certain his wife was killed, and as the final few moments ticked away, you watched in horror, knowing we would finally see what really happened. Butcher's wife is alive. She has Homelander's baby. This ending was beautifully set up and absolutely haunting. Some things about the show really did feel like a knockoff. I know it was based on a comic book, but they really could have spent a little more time with superhero names. Even The Incredibles came up with dozens of excellent names for a single scene. The costuming at times felt somewhat cheesy, and since we're talking about The Incredibles, enough with their capes. Some of the humor, especially since we've been conditioned by the MCU, didn't really land. There's one joke in particular where a flower van has appeared at the hotel. Butcher says outright it's an ambush, and the second you go near it, you'd get jumped. And then that happens. It's such an obvious setup and payoff that you can't help but groan. Even though some of the costuming can feel a little flimsy, the show does know how to make its costumes important. From the moment Starlight is introduced, Voight wants to change her image and make her sexier, building a smaller, skimpier outfit. We see her embarrassment when a little girl is saving up to get her new outfit, and it succeeded at making its point. They also subtly use the costuming to show that she starts acting for herself, not for Voight. When she finally shows up to save Hughie and the boys, she's wearing her own costume, not the one Voight made. Little details like this is one of the show's absolute biggest strength. Early in the season, after Starlight is sexually assaulted, Maeve catches her crying and tells her not to let anyone see her like that. Later, before turning to face Maeve, she wipes her tears. I'm sure there are dozens of little details, but in just one full viewing of this season, I was in awe of how often they brought back little moments. We never really saw Starlight strike back the way the pilot promised. From her very first encounter with the Seven, her illusion is shattered. Behind closed doors, heroes are arrogant assholes, and her encounter with the Deep promises an incredible arc of her confronting her tormentors. For way too much of the season, she's passive, and just takes everything lying down, telling herself, I guess that's the way it is. It's not until the finale that she acts for herself and stands up against A-Train, finally realizing that her behavior is completely unacceptable. At that point, my only thought was, finally. Her story has such promise and I'm eager to see where it goes, but through the first season, her arc was very underwhelming. In some areas, the little details are the show's strength, and in others, it's hard not to get frustrated with what the show leaves out. During his crusade, Hughie keeps intersecting with people from his past, and they're terrified about him. They don't know where he's been or what he's been doing. Simon Pegg, his father, is eventually held captive by A-Train, but he's never really scared or worried about his son. We never see a confrontation about the fact that Hughie is a murderer now. After skipping over the confrontation with Annie, it felt like we never saw real fallout with Hughie's actions in his past, and I felt like it was a real missed opportunity. The story really does like to stop a thread as soon as it's convenient. In an effort to save his dad from A-Train, Hughie enters, and Kimiko sneaks in. She gets the jump on A-Train, shattering his leg, and then that scene's over. Is A-Train dead? Did they finish the job? Why didn't we see any words after stopping the train in its tracks? When we finally see him again, he's limping on his way to a full recovery. Why didn't Kimiko kill him? She clearly had the capability. The more you examine that scene, the more you realize it cut away so Hughie could have a confrontation with A-Train in the finale. It's storytelling like that makes you feel a little cheated and makes the consequences seem small. If everything has to move towards the ending they've set up, then why does anything in the middle matter? What are the stakes? The middle really is my biggest complaint about the show. I watched the first 4 episodes in a single sitting, but after the 5th, I needed a break. The story ground to a halt while they visited the Believe Expo, which was a truly uninspired critique of organized religion that shows Christianity as a cartoon of itself rather than presenting an interesting argument, building their superhero world, or really advancing the plot. We see real-world critiques of the church without examining the world at all. In the very next episode, Hughie and Butcher go to a church to speak with collateral damage survivors. Clearly, this world is different. I was excited to see how they'd handle religion, but disappointed to realize they didn't have any original ideas. The episode is slow, awkward, and nothing substantial really happens until Starlight stands up and gives her speech out in the deep. We even see in the next episode the story about the deep is the only thing people heard, and that's the only thread that's continued. Hughie was at the expo to find out more about Compound V shipments, and it truly felt like a filler episode. It took until the finale to really hook me again. Somehow this season felt 2 episodes too short and 2 episodes too long. By the midpoint I was ready for it to end, but the end worked well enough that I wanted to see where it was going. Part of the reason this season could have benefited from a few more episodes is because every single plot point ends on a cliffhanger. Nothing is resolved. Butcher's team escapes under the garage door and we don't see them again. Starlight is finally standing up and being a real hero in spite of all that Voight has done to her. But where's she going next? Hughie is trying to save A-Train, but what happens then? Is he going to get captured? Is A-Train going to live? We don't know. We don't have any resolution with his father. The military plotline doesn't give us any answers since Homelander kills Stillwell. And of course, the big cliffhanger is finally showing Butcher that his wife had a child with Homelander, and they're both still alive. If this were the only cliffhanger, I think I would have been extremely satisfied. It was a real oh shit moment, but when I started to really think about the ending, I realized everything was a cliffhanger, and it soured the way I felt about the episode. We didn't get any meaningful resolutions, and I hope, provided they get a season 2, that this doesn't become an annual trick. I want to see finite endings, kind of like Chuck, every season. If I have to watch a cliffhanger every season, I'll lose interest quickly. I can't say I hated the ending though. I love the Butcher's wife twist in isolation, and I really like the idea of breaking the cycle. When Butcher's wife disappeared, he was promised revenge. Then when Hughie's girlfriend was killed, he was promised the same thing from Butcher. Butcher kept that fire alive, swearing it's what she'd want, but Hughie was able to move on and break that cycle. He finally understood it's not about getting so attached to the dead that you forget to care about people that are there for you now. Hughie is a direct contrast to Butcher. Butcher was fueled by rage, but Hughie's anger was fleeting, and afterwards he had to lay in the bed that he made. I thought it was a great way to look at consequences and show that when we have to deal with mistakes we make when we aren't in a good place. I especially like the ending when considering that all Homelander wanted was to be loved. He was raised by Voight in isolation. Stillwell was the closest thing he had to a mom, and he desperately wanted affection. He curled up with her wanting to be touched. The entire series he wanted to get back together with Maeve, clinging to love he once had. He's terrified she'd fall for someone else, even threatening her if she would find someone. It's the reason he screamed about a blanket, because in marketing, he was supposed to have an idyllic life, a normal American child, but seeing the blanket he clutched in his cell made his own childhood feel real. He complained about it to Stillwell, mad that they asked him to lie about his childhood and how much it really hurt. Homelander wanted a child of his own, but was told he never could. Butcher's entire existence was driven by his love for his wife, and after seeing how Stillwell cared more about her real baby, he knew that if he can't have love, he had to throw it in the face of someone that once had love, mocking what he can't have to make himself feel okay. I like that the fight scenes were short. They never dragged on, and they felt realistic. It was likely due to the show having a television budget, but I hope they don't invest in huge fight scenes in the future. It felt grittier, and I'm glad they didn't do 10-minute choreographed dance before a tragic speech and a character death. The fights felt visceral, and I was engrossed anytime violence broke out. I found the NDA at the beginning extremely depressing. It echoes the real world in ways we don't like to think about. Constantly we hear about people hurt by companies, and we hear about a settlement, but that person is never allowed to speak about the incident again. Even at a survivors meeting, the victims aren't allowed to say who hurt them or give too many details. In an anonymous event meant to be a safe place to talk, they're still terrified of what might happen to them. The scene where A-Train killed his girlfriend was truly haunting imagery. It was sudden, tragic, and shocking, even if it didn't feel quite believable. I like the idea of power dynamics exploring in relationships. Annie's powers start to show through in bed, and it scares Hughie. The same thing happens at the bowling alley, and at least suggests that a very real mental health issues where people feel inadequate and lack confidence. On the flip side, we also see A-Train and how he handles his girlfriend, who doesn't seem fit to be dating one of the 7. Overall, this series planted the seeds of something that could truly be great. I want to see where it goes, and want to see them focus on solid character development. It's a fresh take on the superhero idea, and I think it had a lot of themes applicable to the real world. You'll benefit the most if you're a fan of superhero media and really want to start thinking critically about what you're consuming and possibly just want to see something different from the usual formula. Overall, I'd rate it as an 82%, and I'm excited for the next season.